Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Kansas City Profiles presented by Easton Roofing. Today's profile is about a person, an organization, and an event, all rolled into one and intrinsically tied to each other. Next Friday, Win for Kansas City Women's Sports Awards celebration will be held. It's on National Girls and Women in Sports Day, and tickets are still available to that event, which starts at 10:30 with a networking reception at the Kansas City Convention Center Grand Ballroom. Just Google Win for KC, and you will be able to find your way to that. And it's a great event and will feature 3-time Olympian and 12-time Olympic medalist Natalie Coughlin, and she'll appear as the guest speaker at the event. They'll give out awards to accomplished women with great stories throughout the sports realm. We'll check out Win for KC through the eyes of Jessica Blubaugh. She returned to the Kansas City Sports Commission in September of 2018 as the director of the Women's Intersports Network for Kansas City after 11 years back east in Atlanta and New York, working for the Women's Sports Foundation in New York and then Atlanta, having the opportunity to work with sports greats like Billie Jean King, Michelle Kwan, Amy Mullins, Julie Foudy, and Jessica Mendoza. She's happy to be back in Kansas City and advocating for women's sports. She's a fascinating and enjoyable person to speak to, and she gives a great picture of Win for KC, which I didn't even know was an acronym, Women's Intersports Network for Kansas City. We'll find out about that and a whole lot more with Jessica Blubaugh. Find out a little bit about her, find out a lot about Win for KC, and find out even more about women's sports and the great event coming up. That's all on Kansas City Profiles, presented by Easton Roofing, right here at the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. We're here with Joe Spiker, the president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you worked for other companies in the construction industry. What inspired you to start your own company in Easton Roofing?
Well, you know, Danny, when you are working for somebody else, you oftentimes don't get to see the project through from beginning to end, and you don't get the final control over the customer experience. And I wanted to build a place where people can come and get work done on their house and not have to worry about being treated the wrong way and get a good customer service experience start to finish.
The company slogan is Where Integrity Matters. Why is that so particularly important to you?
Well, for us, what that means is treating each other with respect at work, treating our clients with respect, and making the right choice, especially when no one's looking. So when you're presented all the time as a contractor with choices that have to be made, are you going to make more money on this if you cut a corner? And we just wanted to make a place and a slogan that said to our people and to whoever is our customer, we're not going to do that. We're going to make the right choice regardless of profit.
Easton Roofing, where integrity matters.
Cinematic Visions has been an affordable solution for professional media production in Kansas City since 2003, offering award-winning video production and creation, as well as a wide array of digital and social media management services. From planning, scripting, filming, editing, and post-production, to delivering your product to a watching world, Cinematic Visions will provide professional and affordable services for you and your business with the necessary return on investment to make it all worthwhile. Cinematic Visions' goal is to unlock the power of storytelling through video and a strong online presence for your company. Beyond the numbers, they want to inspire and evoke your clients to feel and act. Let my friends at Cinematic Visions embed your brand where it belongs, in your customers' minds. You can find them online at cinematicvisions.com or with a quick phone call at 816-600-6300.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Jessica, you grew up in Manhattan, Kansas. What was your upbringing like, and maybe what did that upbringing maybe set a life course for you a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So born and raised in Manhattan, grew up basically an athlete playing sports and played 2 to 3 sports through high school, depending on the year, and had the opportunity to go on and play collegiate sports at Johnson County Community College for 2 years, and then went on to KU after that, which was a tough pill to swallow for my parents growing up in Manhattan and becoming a Jayhawk, but my dad eventually got over it.
What was the reasoning behind betraying your parents' affections and heading to be a Jayhawk?
Yeah, I think 18 years in Manhattan was good for me. I was ready for a change of scenery. My mom is a professor at K-State, so the idea of continuing my collegiate experience through my hometown, it just felt like an extension of high school to me, so I was ready to experience somewhere else and not go back there. I love it now, though. My parents are still there, so I have a strong affinity for particularly college towns. I think that set me up for an appreciation of not only sports in general, but collegiate sports in particular. Just knowing the type of experiences that I had as a kid, being able to go to games and campus activities, it really shaped, I think, a lot of how I think about athletics and the influence it has on young people.
When you were playing as an athlete in high school and then on to junior college, at that point in time, where would you say the state of women's athletics was? What was the developmental portion of it right then?
Sure. I think, so I remember very clearly being in, I think it was early high school when the WNBA started as a league. And I think largely by, I think, both my father's influence around sports, but then my mom sort of as a social justice feminist. I grew up sort of constantly asking the question of, well, why aren't girls playing football? Why aren't girls playing baseball? So I was one of the first girls to play on an all boys flag football team, in 5th grade and 6th grade. So I think I was always looking at sports for women and girls through the lens of, well, why do the boys have all of the opportunities? And so that sort of shift when the WNBA came into existence started to sort of open, I think, at least my eyes as a young person. I was like, oh, there could be more opportunities for women. And I think, I grew up my sport was mostly softball. And so watching Olympic athletes like Dot Richardson on the USA softball team, and some of those athletes from that year of the Olympics, those were the people I idolized. And so I wanted to play like them. I wanted to carry myself like them. And so I think the more, as time went on and as I went through college, the more opportunities continued to grow for participation in particular, has continued to evolve over time in terms of beyond participation, in terms of leadership opportunities and executive positions. So, but that's really where I think I have a very early memory of opportunities for women to compete at a different level.
When you were competing, were all or most of your role models women, or were any men?
I think I would say the majority of them were women in terms of idolizing them. I think I have very early on memories of going to, like, my dad worked for telecommunications for the universities, and he worked game days for basketball and football. So I have very early memories of, pre-Bill Snyder days at the stadium, going and setting up for football games and sitting in the stands when there was no one there.
Right.
And watching the football players warm up and feel like that is like the intensity and the energy in the stadium felt palpable. And that was something I wanted to emulate in my athletic experiences too, was like, really staying focused and really wanting to look that intense and be that intense within my sport. So I think there were parallels and things that I pulled from men in sports, but I think in terms of idolizing specific people, they tended to be women.
When you moved on from Johnson County and playing softball there to Kansas, was your idea of what you wanted to do fully formed yet, or were you still deciding?
No, I think I was definitely still deciding. I think the experience I had at Johnson County was such that it was a quintessential, like, college sports experience. Like, my school was important, of course, and coach did not let us forget that. But everything that I did socially, everything that I did outside of class time was anchored around the team.
Right.
Versus going to KU and then being like, okay, well, I sort of have to, like, re-identify myself on some level. And having the experience of deciding, what am I going to major in? What do I do with my time now? I ended up getting on a rec softball league because it was like I needed something to sort of identify with. But I think it started to formulate once I got to KU. Okay, I didn't know I wanted to work in sports. I sort of fell into it. So going to KU, I sort of had in my head, I want to work in PR, I want to go into communications. So that was sort of the direction that I was thinking I was going to go.
Did you have any kind of withdrawal period from playing competitively? You said you played rec league, but playing what you would call really competitive softball, was there sort of a withdrawal period?
I think both. I think I went through this stage of like not having the regiment of, practice every day after class and games twice a week, and having sort of quote unquote more freedom. So that was I was embracing that for the short amount of time, and then when I was around the game again, in the competitive format that I played it in, I found myself very quickly missing it. So I ended up getting a secondary job at the softball fields, so I could just be around it because I missed that vibe and missed that energy. So yeah, I think the other piece, and I don't think I figured this out until much later in life, I think that there are a group of collegiate athletes that go through this experience of having a really, really interesting relationship to physical activity. And I think my job, both the first time I worked here and the second time now, has caused me to look at this through a different lens as I've gotten older. But I think you go through this sort of almost boomerang effect as a post-college athlete, where you're sort of like, I don't want to work out all the time because I don't have to now.
Right.
So I'm not going to at all. And unless it involved like play of some kind. But I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to be running because all of that feels like what I had to do when somebody was telling me to do it all the time. Mm-hmm. And it took me a long time to sort of get through the psychology of like, oh, I had a weird relationship with this afterwards. And it's taken me a long time as an adult to get to a place where I'm like, I can go work out at the gym and not make myself throw up, like to the point, like working out so
right.
hard where like
right.
you're not really accomplishing anything until you've worked out to the point of that level of exhaustion. So it's an interesting journey that I don't think I knew at that time.
You say you kind of fell into your career after college. How did the falling happen?
Yeah. So the last part of my degree, I had to do an internship. And so I did an internship. I had a friend who worked for the Star at the time. And she said, have you ever thought about doing an internship with the Sports Commission and win for KC? And I said, I don't even know what those things are. She sent me a link to a website, and I applied. And actually, I think I sent a letter and a print
right.
resume because we're both old
That's
enough to remember what that was. And so I got an internship, and I very quickly throughout that experience figured out, okay, events are something that I think I could be good at, and they're fun and they're entertaining and they're definitely not boring, and no day is the same. And so I did the internship for a semester, and then I stayed on as sort of a contract employee for a number of months, and then ended up a position opening, and I fell into that position, offered that position. I earned that position, but they offered me that position, and that was sort of the beginning down that path that I didn't know was going to be my path. But I look back now, and it's like that was the sort of catalyst of all of my career.
You spent 4 years at the Sports Commission initially. Talk about that initial experience, and then you would move on, but we'll get to that in a minute. What was the initial experience like for you?
So I think when I started the internship, I was working for Cindy Smith, who used to oversee our national sports arm. So she was responsible for Big 12 events that came into town, championships, NCAA championships, and competitions that we were hosting. And so I had the opportunity to work with her on those level of events. And then when I was hired on full time, I was specific to Win for KC and the Win programming. And I had the opportunity to work under Patty Phillips, and I don't know, not everybody knows her, but a lot of people do. And
I did basketball
she's
games
a force.
with her. Great person. Yeah.
She's a force, and so I learned a ton from her. She sets a really high bar and pushes for everything that she touches and has any influence over to be the best. And so I had the opportunity to learn a great deal from her. And so it was just the two of us. And then we had a fantastic board and group of volunteers. And in large part, the stuff that we're doing now here at Win is very, if not exactly the same, very, very reminiscent of what we were doing in those days too.
you'd move on to the big city and go to New York for the Women's Sports Foundation, and then subsequently to Atlanta. Tell us a little bit about that.
So it was an interesting path. Patty sent me out to New York to their big gala that they do every October to sort of just get ideas and scout. And so I did, and it was my first trip to New York City, and it was amazing. And one of our former board members lived there, and so it was kind of an in and out kind of deal. And I thought, cool, brought back some ideas. And then about 4 months later, I got an email from them that said, hey, we have this position open, and we were so impressed by what you did that when you were volunteer that we want you to apply. So I applied, and after a lot of conversation and consideration, because New York was like never on my radar.
Right.
So yeah, I took the job. I moved to Long Island. At the time, their office was in Long Island, which is, for anybody who's ever visited or been there, it's a special, unique little microcosm universe that out there.
Right.
And it was a great experience. I got to work for an organization that Billie Jean King founded, and quite frankly, that organization is the catalyst for WIN's existence. So it was an interesting, I think, expansion of the work that we were doing here in Kansas City on the local level for girls and women to a much broader national level. And so I had the opportunity to work with some fantastic leaders like Donna Lopiano and Marge Snyder, and women who I think in the crux of their careers were some of the most steadfast leaders in women's sports and Title IX work that I think I could have ever worked for.
And some big names you worked around,
Yeah.
Billie Jean King, you mentioned, and Michelle Kwan, Amy Mullins, Julie Foudy, Jessica Mendoza, who obviously has gotten a big profile in the last few years in her work in baseball. What is the influence of that, and maybe working with people and not saying, oh, wow, that's Billie Jean King?
Yeah, I think the really cool aspect to what the Women's Sports Foundation does is it really gets at working with these athletes and these celebrities as people, and it sort of takes out the element in some cases and in some ways of sort of an us and them, and it's just kind of an us. And so I had the opportunity to be around those athletes and some celebrities in that process too, where it didn't feel like we were in red carpet environments. It didn't feel it. We were sitting around a table talking about how do we make the world better for girls and women in sports in this country, and that I think also changes. It shows you very quickly that people who you see on TV and that have sort of star power are also just human beings, and they get up and put their pants on the same way that all of us do every day. Which on some level, I think working in events too, that was something that even in my time when I started here at the Sports Commission, before I went to New York, is like the working in events really requires that you get past that sense of celebrity when respecting it, of course, but also not getting caught up in it because it kind of prohibits you from being able to do your job well. So. Mm-hmm.
What is as you've taken this journey, what are some of the challenges that still exist or did exist before and maybe are lesser now in trying to convey a message that, girls still need some help in this regard, and the pushback that you may get from certain elements of, the male community or just the community in general?
So I think there's still an access issue in terms of opportunity and just having girls having the opportunity to play. And we have right here in our community, schools who don't offer the same sports programs and clubs as what they offer for boys. And so I think that even at that microcosmic level, there's still so much room for growth. And at the same time, there's like lack of opportunity, but there's also, when you look at the research, kids are playing less and less. So we know that sports have all of these fantastic physical benefits that you get from them, right? They keep you in better shape. You have less health issues later on in life.
Right.
They keep kids in school. They keep them from using drugs and alcohol too much. we know all of this, yet there are still limited opportunities for kids to do that, and we know that they're doing it less, even if they have the opportunity. So how do you, and then when you zoom in and look at the girls' population, it's like that pie is even smaller. So I think that has been an issue that's been ever present from when I was in high school and after post, Title IX, where it's required that people in schools and institutions are offering equitable opportunities. But then I think you still have some mentality, I think, out there of this idea that girls can't do the same things as men or boys. And while that I think is fewer and far between, that perception still is out there. I still have debates with my dad about why it is okay for girls to lift weights. And that it's actually necessary for them to, and better for their bone density and bone structure to lift weights. Whereas he and I used to butt heads when I was in high school about, well, you can't lift weights because it's going to make you bulky. It's going to make you look like a weightlifter. Well, that's not true. That's scientifically not the case.
Right. I mean, it's very difficult for women to build the kind of muscle that men do, even if they are in excellent shape. The way to get huge is exponentially more difficult.
Yeah, right? And you have to go to extremes to get that. But the benefit that can happen from it on a basic level is really huge. I mean, it pays off in dividends down the line. So I think there's still like a lot of misperception out there, and I think there's a lot of misperception too around the participation opportunities. I think people think, oh yeah, girls have the same opportunities as boys all the time, and that's just not true.
Right. You mentioned that less people are participating, but maybe more people are participating in esports. And in some regards, that's probably a positive, that people that maybe wouldn't have been inclined to do anything anyway have an outlet for competitiveness. But then again, it is a sedentary activity. What's your take on that?
So I have...
And it also seems to be quite still a male-dominated endeavor.
Yeah, I would say I have two perspectives on this. One that is sort of my personal perspective, and one that is sort of when I put the business of sport hat on and look at what is coming down the pipeline. I think like the personal perspective is, yes, it's really hard for the athlete in me to look at esports and go, yes, that's the same. And yes, that's good for us because people are going to sit for hours upon hours playing a video game instead of doing things that are going to push them physically and help physically make them better. Now, there's, I think, the folks on the other side of the fence who would argue and say, well, but if you put trackers on these people and you put heart rate monitors on them, their heart rate's being, it's going up and they're sometimes standing up. And I was like, well, yes, but it's still not comparatively the same as going out and playing something that is physically daunting on your body. Then I put the business hat on and I look at that and say, like it or not, it is an aspect of the future. I mean, it's being looked at as possibly an Olympic level sport competition, which I think is fascinating. Yeah,
I did a podcast last year at Park University, and it was on a day, they have a team, but it wasn't necessarily about the team. It did reflect on the team a little bit, but it was a bunch of gamers had gathered on a weekend, and that same weekend, I think it's called Gila Auditorium in St. Louis now. I've changed those things, changed the name, Scott Trade Center, whatever it is now, was sold out with people to watch gamers play in the World Championship of one of the games. I can't remember which one. And that's the popularity that you see. Now, I will say that I was at this event, and there must have been 300 to 400 people there, and there were probably 30 girls, maybe. And so that area certainly is not what seems to be an area of interest for girls in sports or competitive endeavor.
Yeah, I think that to me, that's a direct result of STEM and STEAM work in schools. And in large part, for the longest time, that has been boys have been traditionally the ones who've been encouraged to go into mathematics and science and things like robotics and engineering, and all of that sort of, I think, has tentacles into the esports space, both in terms of the people who are building and writing these games and the people who are, competing in them. Do I do I look at, like, if I put my Win for KC hat on and look at it through the lens of advocacy work and say, do we have a space to be advocating for more girls in esports? I think I have to know more about, are the opportunities equitable? And maybe women are just not choosing to go after that, or are the opportunities slanted and there are not as many opportunities for women to get into it as perhaps men can have.
Right.
So I don't know enough about that piece of it, but it is interesting to me that, and I don't know, like, maybe that's not something I want to advocate for, because maybe I want girls to be focusing on getting active in, traditional sports.
Right.
I was going to say real sports, but it's probably not the right way to word that, right?
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
Are you thinking of starting a new business? Does your current business feel stuck? Or are you just trying to grow what you already have? Running a business is a lot of work, and it takes the right team to make it all happen. If you're looking to grow your business, call my friends Ben and Greg over at Fuego Consulting. They put together a company that can help you reach your business goals. Whether you're looking to get online, build a social media strategy, or rebrand your business, they can help. Call Fuego at 816-663-9695 or visit them online at fuegoconsulting.com. Fuego Consulting. Let's grow your business together.
For many people, a family law case will be one of the most difficult experiences in their life. The law firm of Kenneth McRae will help you through it. Personal and effective help from Ken in concert with you will develop a unique strategy for your unique case. As Ken always says, divorce can be civil law, not civil war. Licensed in Kansas? Visit McRaeLawOffice.com or call 913-972-4765.
Hey guys, it's Brian Haney, voice of the Jayhawks, and Matt Llewellyn from the 23rd Street Brewery. Matt, I've got a bunch of buddies coming over to watch the big game, and I need some ideas on what to cook.
Hey, let me handle it, Brian.
You're going to come over and cook for us?
For you? Maybe. But you should just let 23rd Street Brewery cater it. We could bring a big pan of Bill Self mac and cheese, wings, veggies, naked nachos, and anything else you might want.
Great. Well, you want to stick around and watch the game?
No, I've got to get back to the brewery and watch it on the big screen.
The place to get great catering and watch all the games, the 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at Danny@DannyKlinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you. Our guest is Jessica Blubaugh, and of course she is with Win for KC. And what brought you back, and what was the job that appealed to you that brought you back?
So I moved back from New York. I sort of took the journey from while with the Women's Sports Foundation. I moved to Atlanta and was there for a while. And then I took a new job that was out of the sports industry altogether. It was still in nonprofit events, but I worked for Teach for America for 5 years, which is a fantastic organization. But wow, it was a steep learning curve for me because I was getting right out of my wheelhouse. But that took me back to New York City. And so part of my agreement with them when I agreed to go back to New York was I got to leave again after a certain amount of time. And they had an office here in Kansas City. So I said, how about I moved to Kansas City and just sort of squat out of that office when I was, in town. I traveled like 75 to 80% of my time. And I just got burnt from that grind. And a position opened up at Visit KC, and I took a position there, and Kathy Nelson was on the board, and I had known Kathy since I was at Win for KC the last time, because she was on the Win board. And so she tapped me the summer of 2018 and said, hey, do you want to come be the Win director? And I said, yeah, that's awesome. And that's sort of me taking the position that Patty used to sit in, and it was sort of a 360 of my career that I did not see coming, but sort of a lovely surprise, sort of the universe threw my way, I guess.
WIN is an acronym, obviously, and for what many people know. In fact, when I started this little enterprise of research, I didn't know it stood for Women's Intersport Network, although I'm very familiar with the organization. What was your what did they lay out as what your job would be as the director? So
I think the thing that I spent the most time talking about with Kathy and some of the board members in the hiring process was, 2019 was WIN's 25th anniversary. And so, yes, this organization's been successful for 25 years, but what does the next 25 years look like? And how do we make sure that WIN stays relevant? I think the landscape under which Win for KC came to be in 1994 for women and girls in this community looks really different now than it did then. And so there are more opportunities for women to engage around sports. There are more opportunities for girls to engage around sports. And there are more either companies that have programmatic arms that are focused on girls and women, or organizations that are focused on girls and women. So how do we make sure that we are keeping the things that are working really well for WIN afloat and successful? And how do we make sure that we're also turning our eyes toward the future and figuring that out? And so that's part of what I'm charged with and think a lot about and spend a lot of time talking with our board members and supporters around is, how do we continue to do the stuff that we're doing really well, like Camp WIN and like the Women's Sports Award celebration, and making sure that those are being improved but also maintained as successful entities of the organization? And how do we also turn our eyes toward the future and say, what next? What is next for us? Does that have something to do with esports and advocacy work for girls? Does it have something to do with looking at different segments of the population in Kansas City in terms of girls, and where are the gaps? Where are the girls that aren't being served, and how do we fill that gap? So that's been a huge focus of mine for the last year and a half.
What are some of the biggest challenges right now still?
So I would say there's certainly the participation, access to opportunities to play. That exists in different pockets of our communities around here. Yeah,
describe some of those challenges, because as you said earlier, I think a lot of people assume, well, look at all these girls playing sports. I go by the soccer field, and it's teeming with girls playing sports, and I see volleyball, and I see basketball, and the volleyball championships were here, and but still describe what areas are being underserved.
I think when you look at some of the more lower socioeconomic pockets of Kansas City, both on the Kansas and Missouri side, there are examples, and the one that comes immediate to mind is the example of Lincoln Prep High School and them bringing back a softball team that they hadn't had for 30 years. And I believe they're the only high school team that exists within the KCPS district right now. They are the only softball team that any of those KCPS schools have. And that's a gap. When you look at, Shawnee Mission schools or Blue Valley schools, where almost all of those schools have equal opportunities for girls to play high school sports as they do for boys. And I think I'm not trying to pick on KCPS, but I think a lot of that comes back down to resources available, and having advocates within the programs to say, hey, we should bring, there's a desire, there's a demonstrated, kids want to play this. It gives these kids something to do.
Right.
And I think that's the other gap that I see sort of across the board in our community is for middle school aged girls. We have a lot of, and we're at fault in this too. We serve kids ages 6 through 12 really clearly, and we serve high school students really clearly. But that gap between 12 through 14,
you can lose them then.
You can lose them, and it's the highest risk group of kids. If we talk about what's in the research and what's in the numbers, kids, if they're not playing sports by the time they're 12, they're not gonna play. But then you introduce middle school, where they have all of the added, complexities that bring that time of life, adolescence bring. And so that there's an opportunity there for us to be serving that audience, both with participation opportunities, but also leadership and, mentoring and all the stuff that comes sort of residually from sports, but that pays off later on in life too.
You mentioned this, the lower socioeconomic aspect of it. Do you think there's a lack of knowledge that that there are hundreds and hundreds of scholarships in college that go unused on the women's side, and this is a great avenue for people who may otherwise not, or at least we know how difficult for anybody it is to pay for college these days. But do you feel like that message is out there for those economic classes?
Yeah, I think I think access to information like that is so hard, and it's ironic, right? We live in a world where we have more access to information than we've ever had, ever. And yeah, I think that is some part of it. I think that people also don't fully get like it doesn't come to people automatically to think, oh, my kid is athletic and has potential, and maybe they're not going to earn a D1 basketball scholarship, but they're athletic enough that they could go earn a crew scholarship,
right,
in rowing. That's something I don't think is clear or readily apparent to people, particularly who are in lower socioeconomic situations where they're dealing with stressors that sort of supersede all of that other stuff.
Right.
So I think that's where, and that's where outside resources like organizations like ours and partnering with schools to help get information out there and help. Schools can't be everything, and this is a conversation we have a lot internally. Is partnering with schools on things is awesome and also challenging because their schools are now looked at to be any number of things on any given day. Their daycare centers, their social work centers, their mental health facilities, their cafeterias, and their schools on all of those things. And that's a lot to ask of our educators. So I think when we're looking at how do we fill gaps, it's how do we do that but not add stress and burden on who we're looking to partner with.
How important is it still to have examples like the U.S. women's soccer team and how they were just embraced across the board, media-wise and everything else, were strong in their message of equal pay, were strong in political messages they were bringing to the table, and because they were performing excellently, those messages could be received whether people agreed with them necessarily or not. But is that still really important and a tool to use?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I think there's still evidence out there, and this applies to both genders, like for kids to be able to see themselves in something later on in life, and for them to be able to look at the television screen and say, I want to be like Megan Rapinoe, or I want to be like Alex Morgan. That is so important because it gives kids hope and it gives them something to strive for. And so both in an athletic environment where they're watching them in competition and how they conduct themselves, how do they win gracefully, how do they lose gracefully, how do you work as a team, like all of that stuff I think has to be modeled for kids in order for us to expect them to be able to do some of that stuff later.
Right. You have big things going on in Kansas City right now. The Big 12 basketball tournament is going to return. That was sort of seen as, okay, Kansas City's got the men's thing all the time now, so we're going to – but it never has been received as effectively as it was in Kansas City. Talk about the excitement level of having that back and your involvement in that. Absolutely.
I mean, we're thrilled. So I think – for me, there's definitely personally some nostalgia around it. When I was at Wynn the last time, we hosted it several times. At that time, it was still rotating between here and like Dallas and other cities. But we're thrilled to have it back because we feel like Kansas City is home for college basketball and Big 12 basketball. So it makes sense for them to come back to Kansas City, and we're excited to welcome the women back in an environment where there's a whole heck of a lot of energy, condensed to that downtown corridor. And our role is really to help, drive ticket sales, get promotion, build awareness around that the tournament's here and going to be here for the next 4 years. So, we'll have a variety of events that'll happen around the tournament within that week that are going to build in both opportunities for people to come watch the games, but also experience different elements of fun and entertainment and personal growth. So we have a mentor event that will happen. We've got a reading and fitness challenge for kids that will happen, and a brunch and basketball event. So there's that fun component as well. So that you're not just getting basketball, you're getting basketball and more if you want, if you want that.
You were back before when you were talking about that nostalgic aspect. Basically, the tournaments ran concurrently. I don't know how the structure is working this time around. Talk about that a little bit.
So, they're still sort of technically separate championships, but the Big 12 has made a really concerted effort to, want the tournaments to be one tournament, that it's not the men's and women's, it's the Big 12 tournament is back. And yes, they're held in two different venues, but those venues are connected by 4 blocks basically, and that's all you have to do is walk 4 blocks to experience one or the other.
Do you think that's a positive because the fan bases are here and maybe they might not be inclined ordinarily to go see a women's basketball game, but maybe it's at a different time, we don't have anything to do right now, let's go put on our Iowa State stuff and go root on the women?
Absolutely. And we're hoping that people see that as an opportunity. There's a discount people will get. So if you have a men's ticket and you walk up to Municipal Auditorium, you get a discount on the ticket to get in the door. So there will be some excellent women's basketball here. I mean, heck, the Baylor Bears just knocked off UConn at home. I mean, that is a huge win. So to have a team like Baylor in the Big 12, and that's essentially, the powerhouse in women's basketball right now in our backyard for that week is so fun. It's going to be some awesome basketball to watch.
No doubt about that. And you have a fantastic event coming up on February 7th, and that's something people can get involved with and purchase a table and come and see very accomplished people and inspirational stories receive their due.
Yeah, so this event is particularly special because it's sort of it is the heart of Win for KC. It's the thing that started this organization. So it's an awards program where we honor 6 local girls and women for what they've accomplished in sports and fitness, and on top of that, we bring in a keynote speaker who tends to be a professional or Olympic athlete. And we're excited about, this year being another fantastic year. We have some award winners that are just, and that's the thing that continues to surprise me year over year is there are so many fantastic stories of girls, women who are doing outstanding, amazing things in our city. And we never run out of content. So it's definitely going to be an exciting day.
And the awards are sponsored by some of the biggest corporations in Kansas City. Obviously, that's to your credit and Wynn's credit. How would you describe the corporate support mentality for women's sports right now?
I think it's huge. I mean, I think it's evidenced by the fact that this event grew to 2,000 people last year and has continued to grow over the course of the last 25 years. When I put my events professional hat on and look at how events tend to perform year over year, this event has continued to outpace itself every year. And so when I look at the roster of people who are coming and sponsoring tables and sponsoring the event at significant levels, I think it's just yet another example where Kansas Cityans put their money where their mouth is, and they say they want to value women's sports, and they say they want to value supporting girls and women in our community, and that's evidenced by the fact that they support this event.
And how can people get involved? Do you still have sponsorships? Do you still have tables, I assume?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's February 7th.
February 7th.
It's Friday.
Friday at the Grand Ballroom at the Convention Center. It's from 11:30 to 1, and you can go to winforkc.org to buy tickets and tables.
That sounds good. I've enjoyed your story. I was the basketball announcer for KU women's team in the late 90s. I really have an affinity for, I just want to get your reaction to this. When you talked about the WNBA at the outset, and I have never, for the life of me, been able to understand some of the disdain that men have for women's basketball. They say, well, they can't dunk, it's not as good, and then I'll just ask them, do you like watching college football? And they'll say, well, yeah. And I say, well, they're not as good as the NFL. In fact, they kind of suck compared to the NFL, but you still like that. I don't understand it. Do you understand that analogy I make?
I do, and I'm going to use it from now on. I will give you credit, but I love that analogy.
Right.
Yeah, because I agree. I mean, I think that comparing the two doesn't make sense, and it's also like the analogy that I often used was people would compare like baseball and softball, and I'm like, you're comparing apples to oranges. They're not the same thing. I think there's a different style of play, and if you value the sport,
right,
truly the sport, then you value the fact that there are different styles of play.
No doubt about that. I appreciate your time, and it's been a pleasure, and I am absolutely thrilled to be a small part of Win for KC and this particular event.
Thanks for having me, Danny.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Kling Scale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.